FLAU, Landesgruppe, Australia. Newsletter number August 24, 2020. Learning from a Pandemic, written by Vibke Walder.
What a year it has been so far. In January we were asked to evacuate our home 3 times due to the bushfires nearby, and then from late February onwards we have been staying home most of the time due to the coronavirus. Both situations are very different opportunities for learning. A bushfire is a tangible threat to one's life. It can be smelt, seen and heard, and one can usually ascertain in which direction to flee to reach a safe place. With the coronavirus it is different. We cannot smell, see or hear it and be warned in time, so our lives are at risk by carrying out everyday activities. As we have learned by now, the best prevention is to treat every other person as infectious and stay home as much as possible. But if one has to go out, the best prevention is keeping a distance of 2 meters to other persons and wearing a face mask if one has to mingle with crowds. Therefore, since March we have experienced different degrees of restrictions for the protection of all citizens and have been forced to stay home as much as possible and to leave only for essential things. That directive has been a great challenge for many fellow human beings, especially those who lost their jobs or had to work from home and have been confined to small apartments or homes, being allowed to leave only for shopping or an hour of exercise. A friend stated that she was going stir crazy, as she had already been working from home for about 3 years and now cannot get any balance in her life by going out for dinners and catching up with friends, etc. For those persons who thrive on human contact and need to be out and about with family and friends, this has been very difficult. My husband and I could be considered some of the lucky ones, as we live in our own spacious home on 1 acre in a rural setting, with the national park in walking distance. My husband was able to quit his job in order to reduce the risk of infection and thus keep us safer, and he began working for himself. And my job as personal carer in residential aged care is essential and secure, which means I still get out of our 4 walls, either to work in the garden, go for a walk or drive to work. However, the lockdown still has had an effect on me and has been a blessing in disguise, because it forced me to spend more time with myself instead of catching up with friends, looking after the grandchildren, traveling to the city for information stands, putting peace flyers into letterboxes and so on. How easy is it to distract our minds with all those and many more important things? But all of a sudden, our lives have come to an abrupt halt and it is time for reflection instead of distraction. And that can be a very different kind of challenge. How often does one look at or listen to other persons when it comes to one's own development instead of looking within and listening to one's own innermost self? How much influence do others have on our lives because we look up to them or they try to direct our thinking and action? Or how often do we take their ideas on board without thinking? As always, studying the spiritual teaching can help us to understand and find answers to those questions.
144.
And those of you who search for help in order to be shown a way in the form of a method or a system for the developmental change of your own inner nature, those are not really seriously working on an effective developmental change, because everything is merely directed towards having others do everything in order to bring about the apparently desired developmental change, whereas there is no fundamental interest in a developmental change of the inner nature, but only an interest in having others use a method or a system which is intended to lead to the apparently wished for developmental change of your own individuality with only minor help from yourselves.
145.
But truly, each way, each method or each system for the developmental change of the inner nature is purely individual, that is to say, personal, and cannot be transferred to another by you. Therefore it would be exceedingly foolish to name a way, a method or a system. If this however were to be done, then you would only be following an imitation, that is to say, a pattern, and thereby taking over the purely individual way, that is to say, the method or the system of another and copying the entire thing into yourselves, through which you would unavoidably get yourselves into difficulties and hardships that are based in the thoughts, feelings, consciousness and psyche, namely through an adapting to an external individuality and through an approval of the same, which without doubt brings forth confusion in your own mental block and leads to chaos in the psyche and consciousness.
146.
This means, if you do such a thing, that you set up the authority of one of your fellow human beings in yourselves, through which enormous conflicts are brought forth between yourselves and the external authority, as a result of which you believe that you are obliged to do this or that which is told and dictated to you, although you are incapable of actually doing it, because you cannot exchange your inner nature with that of one of your fellow human beings, but must be yourselves and free in yourselves in every wise. Therefore two inner natures cannot be existent in you either.
Goblet of the Truth, page 413.
When I was young, my mother often worried about what the neighbors would think or say. It was common for her generation in country Germany to model their own behavior on what they perceived to be expected of them by society. They did not teach us about the laws of creation or to be responsible for our own behavior and bring it in line with the creational laws. The peer pressure was always there to perform according to perceived expectations from others, which caused internal conflicts as described above and which still come to the fore sometimes if I am not conscious of my thoughts. It would have been nice to have had access to the book Goblet of the Truth then and realize that we need to understand the laws that govern nature and model our behavior on them and not on some human-made rules that may have been developed out of a fear of God or some traditions and so forth.
147.
You human beings of Earth, you are individual natures who have your own thoughts and feelings and well as your own and therefore individual intentions and inclinations, hardships and needs as well as wishes which can in no kind and wise be integrated in an external method or an external system which you believe you must follow.
148.
In all respects, an external authority stands in opposition to your own person and dignity. Therefore the recognition of an external authority in yourselves is a contradiction to your own inner freedom and cannot be tolerated under any circumstances.
149.
If you tolerate it nevertheless, then you are no longer yourselves, but rather you lead an existence of doubtfulness and therefore a life between the external method, that is the external system, that is an external ideology and the effective reality of your true life.
150.
If you allow to let yourselves in for an attempt in such a wise that brings your own inner nature into consonance with the external authority, that is the external ideology, then you demolish your own self-consciousness and suppress your entirely own individuality.
151.
The actual truth of yourself is not anchored in the external authority, that is ideology, but solely and alone in you yourselves, and indeed in that which you effectively are.
Studying the Goblet of the Truth is a reminder about how important it is to listen to one's own innermost self, because all the answers to one's questions about what the right things would be in one's own life can be found within. And the less distraction one has from external things and other persons, the better. My innermost self knows me better than anyone else and only my innermost self knows what is best for me. So instead of bemoaning being in lockdown, not having coffees with others or not being able to meet others for small talk, one could use the opportunity to reflect and think about the things that are really important for one's own life. Whenever I catch myself being tempted to rely too much on the opinions and well-meant advice of others when it comes to my own thinking and decision-making, I remind myself that every human being on the planet is an individual with a very different personality and on a very different stage in their evolution, and whatever works for them may not be the right thing for me. Just as you cannot compare apples with pears, you cannot compare one individual human being with another and think that they should do the same things. And when I say the seventh Nicodemean prayer to myself, I give special emphasis to the underlined words.
Seventh Spirit Teaching Prayer by Nicodemean. A speaking to oneself created by the last Enoch.
1. By means of the power of my consciousness with my intellect and with my rationality alone I exercise the almightiness over my knowledge, the truth, my ability, my love and truthfulness.
2. Only my might spreads itself in me, however, no other might, thus I am always conscious of my own thoughts and feelings and I unfold and use my knowledge, my wisdom and my ability, and with this I lead everything to the true love, freedom, harmony and to the peace in me.
3. The power of my consciousness is a distinctness to me, so I use it to my own well-being for my thoughts and feelings and the psyche as well as for my body.
4. Daily I unfold and use my consciousness power, so it is constantly working in me and allows me to face my unknowledge, whereby I nourish my knowledge and my wisdom with love, feeling for others, as well as with understanding and rationality.
5. Through the power of my consciousness I myself recognize my errors and resolve them and avoid committing new ones, so no errors can hinder me anymore in my development and advancement.
6. The power of my consciousness allows me to recognize and avoid false teachings, wrong modes of thinking and all dangers of belief dependency, as well as harmful material and worldly things.
7. Through my consciousness power I myself am in control of my intellect and my rationality, and through the almightiness of my consciousness I am, at all times, conscious of my power, my ability, my peace and knowledge, as well as my wisdom, love and harmony and control everything.
Beam. All 7 forms of prayer by Nicodemean.